Lydia Penrose lived on whispers. She survived in the small, sharp spaces between a turned head and a hushed voice. At 27, she was a professional spectator. Too old to be a debutante, too poor to be a wife, and far too clever to be silent. So she talked. She spun words the way other women spun thread, weaving harmless tidbits into fascinating tapestries of gossip. It was a performance. It was her armour. If they were talking about her, and they always were, she would at least control the conversation. Look, it's Miss Penrose. How brave of her to come. Brave? Or desperate? That gown has been remade twice. Lydia heard it. She always heard it. She felt the eyes on her back as she entered the ballroom at Evermere Hall, 1,000 tiny needles of judgment. She didn't flinch. She smiled. It was the smile she practiced in the mirror, the one that said, "Yes, I heard you, and it doesn't matter." She lifted her chin, her gaze sweeping the room as if she owned it, even though her gloves were frayed at the seam and her heart was a cold stone in her chest. This was the performance. Smile. Nod. Be seen. Remind them you exist. The ballroom was a galaxy of light. Chandeliers dripped crystals like frozen rain. And in the centre of it all, holding court by the grand staircase, was the Duke. Duke Sebastian Harland. Even Lydia's whispers hadn't done him justice. He wasn't a man. He was a statue carved from winter marble. Tall, dark, and utterly still. They said he was a widower. They said his heart was 6 feet under, buried with his late wife. They said he hadn't danced, hadn't smiled in 6 years. He was everything she was not. Powerful, silent, and respected. Lydia looked away, her throat tight. He was a son she had no business looking at. She found her usual spot by the wall, the place where the other wallflowers wilted. She prepared to watch, to listen, to gather the scraps of conversation that were her currency. Then the performance wavered. He was looking at her. It wasn't a glance. It wasn't a polite sweep of the room. The Duke of Waverley, the cold, untouchable, silent Duke, was staring at her. Lydia's breath hitched. Her practiced smile froze. He wasn't supposed to see her. Not her. He was supposed to see the caricature, the town gossip. But his eyes, they weren't cold. They were sharp. They cut right through the remade gown, the frayed gloves, the witty armour. They saw the terrified woman underneath. Her heart didn't just beat. It panicked. It hammered against her ribs, a trapped bird. She had to look away. She had to. She had to smile. She had to put the armour back on. Why couldn't she breathe? She was pinned by his gaze. And then the unthinkable happened. He moved. He pushed away from the pillar. He took one step, then another, his path cutting a straight, silent line through the sea of dancers. The music seemed to thin. The whispers stopped. A true, deafening silence fell over the ballroom as Duke Sebastian Harland crossed the floor. Every eye followed him. Every matron held her breath. Who is he going to? Lady Anne? The new debutante? He walked past them all. He walked past the diamonds, the silks, the fortunes. He walked until his shadow fell over her. Lydia forgot how to breathe. This wasn't happening. It was a joke. A cruel public sport. She could feel the heat of 100 stares. He stopped, close enough for her to smell the faint, clean scent of sandalwood and cold night air. "Miss Penrose," he said. His voice. It wasn't a boom. It was a low, quiet rumble that vibrated in her bones. She couldn't find her own voice. The woman who lived on words was suddenly, terrifyingly, mute. She managed a curtsy. A clumsy dip she was sure looked pathetic. "My lord." It was a whisper. He didn't smile. He simply extended a gloved hand. "Would you grant me this dance?" The world tilted. The silence in the room was no longer silence. It was a sound. A sharp, collective inhale. Lydia stared at his hand. It was a trap. It had to be. He was making sport of her. Tomorrow the whispers would be a hurricane. He pitied her. He mocked her. She should say no. She should preserve the one thing she had left, the tattered remains of her dignity. She met his eyes. He was still just watching her, not with pity, not with malice, with patience, as if he had all the time in the world, as if he was waiting for her, Lydia, to make a choice. Her hand, trembling, rose. She put her frayed glove into his perfect one. His grip was firm, warm. He led her onto the floor. The orchestra, seemingly jolted from a trance, struck the first chord of a waltz. The entire ballroom had become a theatre, and they were the only two actors. Lydia could feel the burn of judgment from every direction. Her blood was ice. He placed a hand on her waist. It wasn't a polite, distant touch. His palm was broad, and she could feel the heat of it through the thin silk of her gown. It was a shock, a sudden spark against her skin. The music started. He began to move. And Lydia, who had only ever practiced waltzing with her own shadow, stumbled. She flushed, a hot, painful red. "Forgive me, my lord," she stammered. "I fear you will find me a poor partner." He didn't laugh. He didn't pull away. He simply held her a fraction closer, his grip steadying her. "Then we shall be equally matched," he murmured, his voice for her alone. "I am out of practice." They moved. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. "You are trembling," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Everyone is watching," she whispered back, staring at the knot of his cravat. She couldn't look at his face. "Let them." 1, 2, 3. He turned her, and the ballroom blurred into a river of candlelight and envious faces. "You know what they will say tomorrow," she said, the words tumbling out, her armour cracking. "They will say you were cruel, or that I was presumptuous." "They will say what they have always said," he replied, his voice calm in the centre of her storm. "It changes nothing. Does it, Miss Penrose? Does their talk change who you are?" She finally looked up. His eyes, a deep, startling blue, were not on the crowd. They were on her. He was listening, and the panic. It didn't disappear, but something else mixed with it. A strange, slow warmth spreading from his hand at her back. A warmth that felt real. She had spent her life performing for people who didn't matter. And now, she was in the arms of the only one who did. And she had no words. The music swelled. He guided her through a turn, and for one suspended moment, she wasn't the town gossip. She wasn't poor Lydia Penrose. She was just a woman. Dancing. The music ended. The final chord hung in the air, thick with silence. They stood, still in the centre of the floor, still breathing the same air. He did not let go. Not immediately. Lydia's heart was no longer panicking. It was just beating. A slow, heavy, painful thud. He bowed. An elegant, perfect bow. "Thank you, Miss Penrose." She curtsied, her knees weak. He released her hand. The warmth vanished. He turned, not with a dismissive flick, but with a slow, deliberate grace, and walked back to the shadows by the staircase. Lydia was left alone. In the centre of the floor. In the centre of the silence. The whispers erupted like a sudden fire, loud and sharp. Brazen. He must be ill. How could she? The sound washed over her, but it couldn't touch the small, glowing ember his hand had left at her waist. She turned, her head high, and walked, not ran, off the floor. She slipped through the French doors onto the cool, empty terrace, her pulse roaring in her ears. She leaned against the cold stone balustrade, sucking in the night air. Her hands were shaking. She had survived. A shadow moved at the far end of the terrace. She tensed. A man stepped out of the darkness. Not the Duke. A rival, Lord Granville, his face a sneer in the moonlight. "A stunning performance, Miss Penrose," Granville drawled, moving toward her. To think all it took was one dance to bring the frozen Duke back to life. Or perhaps he simply recognised a fellow creature of the shadows. Lydia straightened, her armour snapping back into place. "I do not know what you mean, my lord." "Oh, I think you do." He smiled, a thin, cruel line. "You see, I know exactly what those whispers say about you. and I know what you are truly capable of." Lydia's heart went cold. "That is enough." "Is it?" he whispered, stepping closer. "Because I, for one, would love to know what price a duke's attention really costs." The silence was the worst part. The silence of the morning after, when the music has faded and the candles are out, and you are left alone with the echo of what you've done. Lydia didn't sleep. She just stared at the ceiling, her body vibrating with the memory of his hand. She was a fool. A complete, utter 27-year-old fool. One dance. It was just one dance. It meant nothing. It meant everything. Outside her window, Brindleford was already awake, the rumble of a cart, the sharp cry of the milkman, and Lydia knew, as surely as she knew her own name, that her name was on their lips. Lydia Penrose. The Duke. Did you see? In the middle of the floor. Her mother's teacup rattled against its saucer. The sound was a gunshot in the quiet room. "You have done it now, Lydia," she whispered, her face pale. "The whole parish is ablaze." Lydia went to the window, her back to her. She couldn't let her mother see her hands shake. "It was one dance, Mama." The words felt like ash in her mouth. A lie. It wasn't one dance. It was a public execution or a coronation, and she had no idea which. Her mother sighed. A dance with a man who has not danced since his wife's funeral. Lydia winced. The truth landed like a physical blow. She hadn't just made a fool of herself. She had touched something sacred. She had danced with a ghost. She was a scandal. She was a story. By noon, she was a prisoner in her own home. She watched from behind the curtain as Mrs. Gable hurried past, her head turned pointedly away. Even the baker's boy stared at the ground. The performance was over. The armour was gone. She was just raw, exposed. Then the first knock came. A footman. Not hers. One from the hall. He wore the Harland crest. Lydia's blood went cold. He held out a small flat box. "From His Grace, miss." He didn't smile. He didn't meet her eyes. She took it. Her fingers felt like stone. Inside, on a bed of dark velvet, was her glove. The frayed one. And a note. One line. Clean, sharp script. "You left this behind." That was it. Her heart didn't just sink, it cratered. "You left this behind." Shame burned up her neck. It wasn't a gesture. It wasn't a memory. It was tidying. He was returning a lost item. He was sweeping her up with the leftover crumbs from the ball. It was a mockery. He was just tidying up a loose end. And the loose end was her. She dropped the box on the table as if it were on fire. "I'm a fool," she whispered to the empty room. She was alone with it. The shame. The final, cold dismissal. The second knock came 3 hours later. Lydia almost didn't answer. She couldn't take any more. But it wasn't a footman this time. It was the Duke's steward, a man of importance. He looked uncomfortable. "Miss Penrose," he bowed. "His Grace asks this be delivered to you, directly." He held out a small, heavy parcel wrapped in plain brown paper. No crest, no velvet. Her fingers fumbled with the string. Inside, nestled in damp moss, was a single white rose. Its scent filled the room, clean, sharp, and alive. Another note. Her heart was a fist in her throat. She unfolded it. His handwriting. Not a dismissal. Something else. For the courage to stand among wolves. Her breath didn't catch. It stopped. She read the words again. For the courage to stand among wolves. He hadn't seen a fool. He hadn't seen a gossip. He hadn't seen a desperate aging wallflower. He had seen the ballroom for what it was, a hunting ground. He had seen the whispers, the turned heads, the judgment. He had seen wolves. And he had looked at her. And he had called it courage. Lydia sank into the chair, the rose cold against her palm. She was shaking. But this time, it wasn't from fear. The first note had been a slap, a cold dose of reality. This was something else. This was a secret. This was a man who saw through her armour, looked at the terrified woman hiding underneath, and approved. The first note had been a dismissal. This was a weapon, or a promise. Lydia stared at the rose, her heart a traitor in her chest, and she had a terrible, sinking feeling. The dance hadn't been the end. It was the beginning. For 3 days, the white rose sat on her windowsill. A perfect, beautiful contradiction in a room that had only ever known plainness. Lydia told herself to throw it out. It was a risk, a memory that would curdle and turn brown. She couldn't. She told herself the dance meant nothing. The note was just pity. She almost believed it. And then the carriage came. It wasn't a small carriage. It was a black lacquered monolith gleaming with the Harland crest. It didn't just stop in their narrow lane. It dominated it. Curtains twitched. Lydia felt their eyes from 3 houses down. Her mother's hand flew to her throat. My heavens! You cannot receive him dressed so. Lydia looked down at her simple morning dress, hands dusted with flour. I cannot not receive him, she said, her voice a dry rasp. Her heart wasn't just beating. It was a brawl. She brushed the flour from her skirt, fingers numb. This wasn't real. Dukes didn't call on gossips in cottages, not in broad daylight. He filled the doorway. The small room seemed to shrink. The air sucked out of it. Sebastian Harland stood there, his gaze taking in everything. The worn rug, the out-of-tune pianoforte, the scent of bread. He bowed, a real respectful bow. Miss Penrose? My lord. The silence was deafening. Lydia's mother, sensing a storm, curtsied and fled. Lydia was alone with him, again. I hope I do not intrude, he said. You do, Lydia heard herself say. The words were out before she could stop them, but only slightly. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Then I shall take care to offend no further. He was still holding his gloves. He hadn't come to sit. Her stomach twisted. He's here to demand his rose back, to tell me to be silent. Why did you really ask me to dance, Your Grace? She asked, her voice sharp. Her armour, her first defence. He regarded her, his blue eyes unreadable. Because everyone said I would not. The honesty stung. That is hardly flattering. Nor was it meant to be. He took a step closer. She fought the urge to step back. You intrigue me, Miss Penrose, he said, his voice that same low rumble. You speak truth where others speak comfort. It is a dangerous quality. Lydia gave a small, brittle laugh. And you came all this way, to warn me of danger. To thank you, he said. The words hung in the air. To thank me. For reminding me, he said, his gaze fixed on her. That honesty can still be elegant. The room went still. He wasn't talking about the dance. He was talking about her sharp-tongued, gossiping, ruined self. He had looked at her flaws, and he had called them elegant. Lydia's throat tightened. She had to turn, moving to the window to hide the sudden hot sting in her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her that way. You must think me very small, she whispered to the glass, beside the women of your acquaintance. She felt, more than heard, him move behind her. I think you, he said, his voice quiet but close, very alive among them. Her breath caught. She turned. He was standing right there. Too close. The air between them was electric. She could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes. You choose your words too carefully, my lord, she managed. And you, he replied, choose yours too quickly. The exchange hung between them. A challenge. A confession. For the first time, Lydia saw the marble statue crack. A faint flush of colour rose in his cheeks. He looked away first, breaking the spell. He cleared his throat. Forgive me. My purpose was simple. To ensure you suffer no further for a dance I began. And if I already have? She asked, the bitterness returning. Then I regret that, he said, his sincere gaze almost painful. Deeply. This was the moment. He would bow and leave. Duty done. She should let him go. "Will you stay for tea?" she asked, her voice a whisper. He hesitated. A duke, drinking tea, in her parlour. The scandal would burn the village to the ground. He knew it. She knew it. His gaze flickered to the door, then back to her. It was a test. "If you wish it," he said. Her heart didn't just beat. It leapt. He wasn't running. He was staying, her mother returned, eyes wide with terror and triumph. They sat. They spoke of the weather, of the harvest. The words didn't matter. The space between the words was deafening. The shared glances. The way his knee was inches from hers. The way he watched her over the rim of the chipped teacup. When he finally rose to leave, she walked him to the door. "You will be spoken of," she said quietly. "I am spoken of regardless," he replied. "The difference now is that I no longer mind." He stepped into the sunlight, then paused, turning back. His expression was serious. "Miss Penrose, you have a rare gift." "A gift, my lord. To unsettle a man who believed himself beyond such things." Lydia met his gaze, her heart a wild, unsteady thing. "Then perhaps, my lord," she said, her voice soft but sure, "you should stay unsettled a while longer." For the first time, he smiled. A full, unguarded, breathtaking smile. And Lydia Penrose knew, as his carriage rolled away, that she was no longer just a gossip. She was a danger. June arrived in a shimmer of heat. The meadows were gold at the edges, and Evermere Hall's climbing roses were a riot of colour. Lydia had promised herself she would not go to the summer fete. It was a lie. She had to. She had to know. She wore her pale green gown, the modest one. As she stepped from the carriage, the heads turned. But the whispers were different now. Not just mockery, there was expectation. The dance and the Duke's visit had left their mark. Under a white canopy, ladies sipped lemonade. The air smelled of roses and sugared fruit. And somewhere, a cello was playing. A deep, familiar sound that pulled at her heart. She turned. He was there. Sebastian stood near the edge of the garden, speaking with the vicar. His coat was off. The stern lines of his face were softer in the sunlight. He glanced up, and his eyes found hers. Across the entire lawn. Instantly. A flicker of something. Surprise? Recognition? He excused himself and began to cross the lawn. Lydia's pulse stuttered. She turned toward the rose walk, pretending to admire the blooms. It was foolish. It was childish. But she needed a second to breathe, to put the armour back on. "Miss Penrose." His voice. Closer now. It still did that thing to her bones. "Your Grace," she said, without turning. "You flee as if I were the law itself." "I flee," she replied, finally facing him, "because I am certain you attract it, and I have had enough judgment for one season." A hint of laughter stirred in his tone. "Then allow me to offer refuge. The garden seems large enough to hide us both." They walked together down the path, the hum of the party fading. Bees droned in the roses. The air was thick with summer. Lydia kept her gaze ahead, unwilling to betray how his nearness unravelled her. "I did not expect to see you here," she said finally. "Nor I you." "Then we are both unwise." He smiled faintly. "Wisdom is a poor companion. I prefer honesty." She stopped, turning to him. "Honesty, Your Grace, is precisely what ruins me." His gaze was steady. "No. Gossip ruins you. Honesty redeems." She almost laughed, but it came out as a sharp exhale. "You speak as though you know the difference." "I do now." Their eyes held, too long, too bold. The sun dappled through the leaves, falling in fragments across his sleeve, her cheek. "Tell me something," he said quietly. "Why do you do it?" "Do what?" "Speak of others, as though the telling were a duty." Lydia hesitated. The truth was a stone in her throat. "Because," she said, her voice dropping, "it is safer than speaking of myself." He nodded once, as though that explained everything. And yet here you are, letting me see you anyway. She turned away, shame and something else, something warm, rising in her cheeks. He saw too much. You are far too perceptive, my lord. Not perceptive, he said. Simply grateful. Few people speak to me as if I am a man instead of a title. His hand brushed a rose as they passed. Do you know, he said softly, how long it has been since anyone contradicted me to my face? I imagine they value their position, or fear the cost of honesty. And you, she asked, do you fear it? He met her gaze. His voice was low. Only when you speak it. The words silenced her. A breeze lifted her hair, carrying the scent of rosewater between them. He reached toward a nearby branch and plucked a pale, perfect bloom. He held it out to her. A peace offering. For the ruin you claim I caused. Lydia hesitated before taking it. You tempt more scandal than peace, your grace. Then let us be equal in temptation. Their fingers brushed as the rose passed between them. Neither moved. The world held its breath. A distant bell from the church broke the spell. Lydia stepped back, the colour high in her cheeks. We should return, before we are missed. Missed, he said, or seen. Both, she admitted. They walked back toward the crowd, each step measured yet charged with something unspoken. Before they reached the lawn, Sebastian paused. Miss Penrose. Yes? I find myself thinking of that night, the waltz. Her heart stumbled. As do I. And I cannot decide, he said slowly, whether it was the beginning of my undoing or the start of something far better. Lydia couldn't breathe. Perhaps, she whispered, time will tell. Perhaps. When they rejoined the fete, conversation resumed. But Lydia felt the weight of the rose in her hand, soft and fragrant. A secret. A promise, a danger. She didn't know which. She only knew that the ground beneath her feet was no longer solid. It began with a letter. Not a letter Lydia received, but one she had written. She had written it after the garden fete, her heart too full and soft. She had poured her confusion, her hope, and her fear onto a single page. A letter she never meant to send. A letter she thought she had burned. She was wrong. It appeared at the dressmaker's first, then the vicar's tea. By noon, every drawing-room in Brindleford held a copy. Her words, her handwriting twisted. Her real words had been vulnerable. I cannot decide whether it was the beginning of my undoing. But new words had been added. A cruel, ambitious forgery. Or the star of my fortune? He will be mine before summer's end. The town didn't just whisper. It feasted. Lydia Penrose was not a gossip. She was a schemer, a predator. The milliner refused her coin. The vicar's wife crossed the street to avoid her. Lydia walked home through a gauntlet of silent, staring faces. This was not judgment. This was exile. Her mother was waiting at the door, her face a mask of grey terror. She was holding a copy of the letter. Tell me it is false, her mother whispered. Lydia looked at her own handwriting, at the terrible, boastful words she had never written. I burned the original, she said, her voice hollow, her mother's eyes filled with tears. Then someone went through the ashes. Lydia's blood ran cold. She thought of Lord Granville's sneer on the terrace. I know what you are truly capable of. This was his work. She knew it. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. Her armour was gone. Her performance was over. This wasn't a scandal she could survive with a witty reply. This was ruin. She turned to her mother. Pack my things. I am leaving for the coast. For Aunt Elspeth's. You're running. No, Lydia said, her voice shaking but firm. I am finished. She was packing her trunk when the storm broke, rain lashing against the window, and then a knock. A heavy, insistent slam that rattled the door. It was him. Sebastian Harland stood on their threshold, drenched, his coat dark with rain. He wasn't a duke. He was a storm. He held a copy of the letter in his fist. Who gave this to you? Lydia asked, her voice flat. It was left at the hall, he bit out. Then you have read it. I have. Lydia's heart ached. And what did you think? He hesitated, his gaze searching her face, his eyes raw. I thought it too earnest for malice, and too cruel for chance. She flinched. Then you believe me innocent? I believe, he said, stepping into the hall, that you would never parade your heart to strangers. Something inside her broke, not from sorrow, but from gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, her hands clenching, though I fear your belief will not save me now. No, he said, his voice quiet, but the truth might. Let me speak for you. She whirled on him. No, I will not hide behind your name. I will not be your charity case, the gossip you saved. I began this. Let me finish it. This is not finishing it, Lydia. This is surrender. It is the only choice I have left. The rain hammered the roof. The air in the small cottage crackled. Do not go, he said, his voice low and rough. Not like this. Let me... She shook her head, a single tear finally escaping. You cannot fix what the world delights in breaking. He took a step, his hand half raised, but she stepped back. When do you leave? He asked, his voice defeated. Tomorrow, at dawn. He looked at her for a long, terrible moment. He saw her pride, he saw her shame, and he saw her decision. He nodded once, his jaw tight. Then I will not stop you. He turned and walked back into the storm. Lydia watched him go, the rain swallowing him whole. Only when the carriage wheels had vanished did she let herself collapse against the door, a sob tearing from her throat. She loved him. And because she loved him, she had to leave him. She finished packing by candlelight. At dawn, she walked out of the cottage, a single trunk in her hand. She did not look back. She left at dawn. The storm from the night before hadn't passed. It had waited. Rain didn't just fall. It was an assault. A cold, grey wall of water that turned the road to a river of mud. Lydia wasn't just walking. She was fleeing. The mud clawed at her boots, trying to steal her shoes, trying to pull her down. She was soaked, not just wet. Soaked to the bone, her cloak a useless, heavy weight. Her pride felt just as cold. This wasn't an escape. It was a pathetic, humiliating retreat. She'd made it barely a mile from the cottage. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats, not a carriage. A single horse, galloping hard. Her heart didn't just stop, it seized. No, please, no. She turned. He reined in, the massive black horse rearing in the mud. Sebastian! He wasn't a duke. He was a fury. Rain plastered his dark hair to his skull. His coat was undone, his face pale and set. He looked undone. What are you doing? She yelled over the wind. I'm stopping a fool from making a mistake, he roared back. Which one? She cried, the rain stinging her face. Me for running, or you for following? Both. He swung down from the horse, landing in the mud with a splash. He was in it with her now. She took a step back. Go back, my lord. Your reputation is getting wet. Damn my reputation! He crossed the space between them in 2 strides and gripped her arm. His hand was a vice, his touch burning, even through her wet sleeve. Did you think I would let you go? You have to, she screamed, her voice breaking. I am ruin. Look at me. This is what I am. This is what I do. I ruin everything. I am looking at you. His voice broke, raw and furious. Do you think I care about the letter? About Granville? About the whispers? He pulled her closer, his face inches from hers. She could see the fire in his eyes. I read that letter, Lydia. The real words and the false ones. And the only thing I felt was terror. Her anger died, replaced by a cold, sharp confusion. Terror? Terror that they would drive you away, he said, his voice dropping to a desperate, ragged whisper. Terror they would tear you down before I could tell you. He stopped, his breath catching. Before I could tell you that you were right. The night of the garden. You were right. Right about what? She whispered, her body shaking from the cold. From him. He looked at her, all the anger gone, replaced by a vulnerability that was more shocking than the storm. You asked if it was the beginning of my undoing. It was. It is. He had just confessed. He was ruined too. They stood there, two people, soaked to the bone in the middle of a muddy road, with a truth that changed nothing and everything. The rain poured down, and Lydia didn't run. She couldn't. He didn't release her arm. The rain was still a deluge. He was right. This was a mistake. Go back, she whispered, her fight gone. Just a cold, empty void. We go back, he corrected, his voice raw. He didn't lead her. He pulled her, his hand a vice on her arm, dragging her from the mud, back to the small cottage. He didn't let go until they were inside, dripping on the floorboards. Her mother was nowhere to be seen. They were alone. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rain and the sound of their own ragged breathing. Lydia was shivering, her wet cloak a lead weight. She couldn't move. She just stared at the puddle forming at her feet. She had no armour left. He turned, not as a duke, but as a man. He ripped off his own drenched coat and threw it to the floor. He moved to the hearth, his hands shaking as he struck a flint. He was a powerful, graceful man, but this simple act was clumsy. He was rattled. The kindling caught, a small, hungry flame. Lydia watched him, her voice a rasp. Why? He didn't turn. Because I will not let them win. They already have, she said, hollow. He turned from the fire, his eyes burning. No, they did not. I almost did. He stalked to the centre of the small room. He looked trapped. For 6 years, he began, his voice low, I have been the grieving duke, the man buried with his wife. Lydia just watched him, her heart a cold stone. They called it grief, he said, his voice cracking. It wasn't. It was relief. The confession landed. Lydia's breath hitched. She was polished, he said, the words tasting like poison. She was beautiful, and she was cold, and she was empty. A perfect, hollow room. And when she died, I felt nothing. Nothing at all. He was pacing now, a lion in a tiny, fragile cage. The world expected a broken heart, so I gave them one. I built walls. I wore my grief like your... His eyes met hers. Like your armour. Oh. The stone in her chest broke. She saw it. She saw him. The man who hid behind silence. The woman who hid behind words. They were the same. I was a ghost, he whispered, stopping in front of her. I was numb. And then, you. At the ball. You weren't numb. You were... alive. You were terrified, and you were defiant, and you were so blindingly real. I didn't dance with you out of pity, he said, his voice rough. I danced with you out of need. I needed to feel something. And you made me feel everything. She was no longer cold. He wasn't a duke. He was just Sebastian, a man who was lonelier than she had ever been. Her hand, trembling, lifted. She didn't think, she just acted. Her fingers touched his sleeve. It was still damp. He flinched, not away, but like a man unused to a gentle touch. He looked down at her small, pale hand on his arm. Slowly his own hand came up and covered hers. His skin was warm. The air in the room didn't just change, it stilled. It became safe. The rain softened. The fire crackled. For a full minute, they just stood there, breathing. His thumb moved, a slow, single stroke over her knuckles. It was the first real, honest touch of her entire life. And then a sound. Not the rain. Not the fire. Outside. The unmistakable thud of a footman's staff on the door. A carriage. Loud. Impatient society. Lydia's eyes flew open, wide with a new terror. Sebastian's face hardened. The vulnerable man was gone. The Duke was back. The world had found them. The knock came again. Not a request. A demand. Lydia's heart, which had just started to feel safe, seized. Sebastian's hand tightened over hers. The peace was gone. The world was back. "Do not move," he whispered. Lydia's mother appeared, her face ashen. "My lady, the vicar is at the door, and Lord Granville." Lydia's blood went cold. Granville. I know what you are truly capable of. This wasn't a social call. This was an execution. Sebastian's face hardened. The vulnerable man was gone. The Duke was back. He released her hand, and the warmth went with him. "Let them in," he said, his voice pure ice. Lydia couldn't breathe. "My lord, you cannot be seen. Not here. Not like this." "I am precisely where I mean to be," he said. Lord Granville entered first, his smile a thin, cruel line. He was the fox. The vicar, Mr. Hemlock, followed, his face a mask of false concern. He was the hunting dog. They stopped dead. The tiny parlour became a stage. The scene was damning. Lydia, her hair wild, her dress still damp. The Duke, his coat off, his hair matted from the storm, standing by her fire. Two worlds colliding. And the evidence of their collision, his discarded coat, was still on the floor. Granville's gaze drank it all in. The dishevelled Duke, the terrified woman, the two teacups from yesterday. His eyes glittered with triumph. He had won. "Miss Penrose," Granville said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "We were so concerned. When the storm hit, we feared you were unwell. Imagine my relief to find you entertaining." The vicar cleared his throat. "Miss Penrose, Your Grace, this is highly irregular." Lydia's armour was gone. She had nothing. She just stood there, shaking, waiting for the blade to fall. She was a fool. She had ruined him. Granville's gaze flicked to Sebastian. "Your Grace, I had no idea you were in the neighbourhood." The insult was clear. There was a long, terrible silence. Lydia watched Sebastian. This was it. The choice. He could lie. He could say he was checking on her. He could invent an excuse, save his reputation, and leave her to the wolves. She held her breath. Sebastian didn't look at Granville. He didn't look at the vicar. He looked at Lydia. He took a slow, deliberate step away from the fire and stood next to her. Not in front of her. Next to her. A united front. "Lord Granville," Sebastian said, his voice not loud, but it filled the room. "You are correct. You did interrupt." The vicar gasped. Granville's smile wavered. I hardly see—" "No," Sebastian cut in, his voice like cold steel. "You do not. You see a woman you believe to be unprotected. You see a rival you wish to wound. You see an opportunity." He took a step toward Granville. The vicar shrank back. "Let me be regular. For you, gentlemen." He turned back to Lydia. In front of them all, he took her hand, her cold, trembling hand. He didn't just hold it. He lifted it to his lips, a public, deliberate, possessive act. "Miss Penrose," he said, his voice low, for her and for them, "has done me the honour of accepting my protection." Lydia's head snapped up. Her heart thundered. "So, if your concern is for her welfare," Sebastian continued, turning his gaze back on Granville, "you may rest easy. I have it in hand." He smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Now, if your true concern is for your own amusement, I'm afraid you will have to find it elsewhere." He was, in the politest way possible, telling them to get out. Lord Granville's face was a mask of pure, white-hot rage. He had been outplayed. He had come to ruin a gossip. He had instead just witnessed the Duke claim his future Duchess. The vicar was already backing out the door. Granville, his eyes murderous, had no choice but to follow. The door closed. Lydia was still standing there, her hand in his. She was shaking so hard she thought her bones would break. She looked at him, her eyes wide with terror and something else. "What?" she whispered. Have you done?" "I have made my choice," Sebastian said simply, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "Now, I believe you have one to make." The door clicked shut. The silence that fell was more violent than the confrontation. Lydia was still standing there, her hand in his. Her skin was on fire where he'd kissed it. She ripped her hand away. "What?" she whispered, her voice a raw, shaking thing. "Have you done?" She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the door, at the ghost of Lord Granville. "I have done what I should have done in the garden," Sebastian said, his voice calm. You... She couldn't find the words. She was suffocating. "That was Lord Granville. That was the vicar. This isn't a game." She turned on him, her terror making her fierce. "You didn't just defeat him, don't you see? You humiliated him. Men like Granville do not simply lose. They seek ruin, and you just handed him a sword." "Let him have it," Sebastian said. "He will not use it on me," she cried. "He will use it on you." "He can try." The coldness of his reply stopped her. He truly didn't care. How can you not see?" she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I am the town gossip. I am the schemer. But you were the grieving duke. You were untouchable. Now they will have a new name for you." She finally said the word, her voice cracking. "They will call you mine, and it will destroy you." "And does it matter what they call me?" he asked, his voice still quiet. "Yes," she shouted, a broken sob. "It matters when it means I have ruined you." He hadn't moved. He was a rock in the middle of her storm. He just watched her break, watched her panic, watched her finally stop performing. "Is that what you think this is?" he asked, his voice low. "You, ruining me. I am not a fool, Lydia. I am not a boy. I know what this costs. I know what Granville is. I know what the ton is." He took a step, closing the space between them. She wanted to run. She was still in her damp, clinging clothes. She felt exposed. "Then why?" she whispered, tears finally hotly burning down her cheeks. "Why would you do it?" He didn't answer with words. He lifted his hands. Slowly. He didn't grab her. He cupped her face. His thumbs were gentle on her cheekbones, tilting her head up. It was not a duke's touch. It was not a protector's touch. It was a man's. "Because the cost of losing you," he whispered, his eyes searching hers, "is higher." The world stopped. The rain, the fire, her own heart. It all just stopped. He wasn't choosing against Granville. He was choosing her. This was his choice. And his final words to her, from before. "Now you have one to make." It all made sense. He was a man who had chosen his ruin. Would she be brave enough to choose hers? She was still shaking. But this time... She didn't pull away. She leaned into his hands, a movement so small it was almost invisible. A tear slipped, and his thumb brushed it away. "You are mad," she whispered. A faint smile touched his lips. The Duke was gone again. It was just Sebastian. "Then we are mad together." He studied her. "You are cold." She'd forgotten. She was still soaked from the storm. He let go of her face, and the loss of his touch was a physical ache. "Go. Change," he said, his voice a quiet command. She turned to go, her legs unsteady. She stopped at her bedroom door. You cannot stay here." "I am not leaving you," he said. It was not a promise. It was a fact. "They will know," she whispered, horrified. He met her gaze. "Good. Let them." He turned back to the fire, stoking the embers, taking possession of the room, of her, of their shared, terrible future. Lydia closed the door, her back sliding down the wood, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't alone in the scandal. She was terrified, and she had never felt safer. Lydia woke to silence, a deep, unfamiliar quiet. The storm was over. The rain had stopped. For one hazy second, she was just Lydia, in her small, plain room. Then it all came flooding back. The rain, the chase, the confrontation, Granville, Sebastian. His hands on her face, his voice low and rough. "I will call you my wife." Her heart didn't panic. ached. A slow, heavy beat against her ribs. It wasn't a dream. She was ruined. She was saved. She was, terrifyingly, in love. She rose and dressed, her hands moving with a strange new purpose. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was no longer in command. She was no longer a performer, bracing for the whispers. She was a soldier, waking up after the first battle. The war was still waiting. She walked down the stairs. He was there. He hadn't left. He was standing by her fireplace, not as a duke, but as a man waiting. He had found a pot and made coffee, the rich scent filling the small, humble room he looked up when she entered. He hadn't slept. His eyes were weary but sharp, and when they met hers, they were calm. "Good morning, Miss Penrose," he said. It was so normal, so domestic. It was the most surreal moment of her life. "My lord," she said, her voice soft. "Sebastian," he corrected, holding out a cup. She took it. Their fingers brushed. The spark was still there. "Sebastian," she tried again. The name felt new in her mouth. What now? What happens today?" "Today," he said, "we wait." "Wait for what?" "For Lord Granville to make his move. He will not and cannot let this rest. He will strike, and he will do it publicly, and when he does—" "When he does," she prompted, her heart thudding. "We will end it." The knock came 2 hours later. It was a messenger, not from the village, but from London. He carried a packet, sealed and stamped. Sebastian took it. He broke the seal. It wasn't a letter. It was a newspaper, the London Chronicle. He scanned the page, his face impassive. Then he went still. "He is faster than I thought," Sebastian murmured. "What is it?" Lydia's voice was a whisper. Sebastian didn't hide it from her. He laid the paper on the table. It was the society page. Lord Granville had written a letter to the editor. It was a masterpiece of malice, disguised as concern. It never named them. It didn't have to. It spoke of a certain grieving duke, a man of high standing, who was being tragically ensnared. It mentioned a provincial schemer, a woman of known and ill repute, who had used calculated wiles to prey upon a good man's grief. It warned the ton to be on guard against such ambitious and fallen creatures. Lydia read the words, and all the air left her lungs. Schemer, ill repute, fallen. He had gathered every whisper, every piece of her old, broken armour, and had held it up for the entire world to see he had branded her. This wasn't a scandal. This was a public execution. The old panic surged. Hot and acidic, she wanted to run, to hide, to scream at Sebastian to deny it, to tell them she was nothing to him. He, she stammered, her hands shaking. He has won. He has told them exactly what I am. Sebastian was silent. He just watched her. He waited for her to spiral, waited for her to break. Lydia met his gaze. She saw his patience. He wasn't afraid. And in that moment she was furious. Her panic died and something new rose in its place, a cold, quiet rage. "He is a coward," she said, her voice shaking, but not with fear. "He didn't even use my name." Sebastian's mouth curved in a faint, terrible smile. "No," he said, "he did not. And he has just given us our stage." He walked to the door. "My carriage will be here within the hour. From Evermere." "The carriage? Where are we going?" "To London." Her heart stopped. "London? Now? Sebastian, you cannot. They will destroy you." "They can try," he said. He took his coat, the one he had worn in the storm, from the hook. He turned to her. "Laxlid, my driver, will bring a trunk pack whatever you need, Lydia." He paused, his eyes holding hers. "And wear your best gown, the green one." The drive to London was 4 hours of charged silence. Lydia sat across from him in the grand carriage, the Harland crest emblazoned on the door. Every villager they passed, every carriage they overtook, stared. Lydia felt like a creature in a cage, being paraded through the streets, but Sebastian just read a book, as if it were any other Tuesday. His calm was her anchor. She didn't speak. She just watched him, and she breathed. They did not go to a hotel. They went to his London residence, a fortress of white stone in the middle of Mayfair. "What now?" she asked, as the sun began to lower. "Now," he said, glancing at the clock. "It is 5 o'clock. The fashionable hour. We are going for a drive." "A drive? Where?" "Hyde Park." She almost fainted. Hyde Park. At 5. It wasn't a drive. It was a declaration of war. It was the centre of the world. Everyone would be there. Granville would be there. "Sebastian," she pleaded, "this is what he wants." "I know," he said, "and I am so very tired of making him wait." The park was a sea of glittering carriages, of high-fashion gowns and pristine horses, and just as he'd predicted, of whispers. As their carriage rolled onto the main drive, the effect was immediate. It was as if a wave of silence rolled ahead of them, and a wave of noise erupted behind them. Carriages slowed. People stopped. Lydia felt 1,000 eyes on her. She felt naked. Her hands were clenched so tightly in her lap, her nails were biting into her own skin. "Lydia," Sebastian said, his voice quiet. She turned. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at her. "Do you remember what I said?" he asked. "That first note?" She nodded, her throat tight. For the courage to stand among wolves. "They are here," he said softly. "Look at me, not at them." He held out his hand. She put her trembling hand in his. He gripped it, firm, warm. "The dance," he said, "is not over." Then she saw him, Lord Granville, standing by the Serpentine, holding court. He was laughing. He saw their carriage. His laughter died. His face was a mask of pure, triumphant malice. He thought Sebastian was here to fight, to make a scene, to publicly deny her. He straightened, bracing for the confrontation, his smile a cruel sneer. He was ready. Sebastian's carriage did not go to him. It simply stopped, right in the centre of the park. Sebastian stepped out. The entire park went dead silent. Lydia's heart was a drum. This was it. Sebastian didn't look at Granville. He didn't look at anyone. He just waited by the carriage door, a silent anchor in a sea of whispers. He turned and he offered his hand to Lydia. This was the move. Not a denial. Not a fight. A presentation. Lydia looked at his hand. This was her choice. The final one. To be the provincial schemer, or to be his. She placed her hand in his. He drew her out of the carriage. She took her place beside him. She was not in a frayed gown. She was in her best green silk. She was not a cowering gossip. She was a woman, and she was his. His action was unmistakable. This is not a schemer. This is not my mistress. This is my choice. The silence was broken by a collective gasp. Lydia met Granville's eyes across the grass. His face. It was no longer triumphant. It was ashen. He was ruined. To say another word, to print another line, would be to directly, publicly insult the chosen, future Duchess of a Duke. It was a sin the Tun would never forgive he hadn't been defeated. He had been erased. Lydia held Sebastian's arm, her head high, and she looked at the crowd. The whispers were a storm. She heard them, but they sounded distant. He wasn't standing in front of her. He was standing beside her. And she was still. That night, they returned to Evermere Hall. The war was over. The house was quiet. The moonlight spilled onto the marble floor of the grand gallery. There was no orchestra. There was no audience. There was just them. Lydia stopped by the tall windows, looking out at the silver-lit garden. She heard his footsteps. He came to her side. "It is done," she whispered. "It is," he said. They were silent for a long time, just breathing in the peace. He held out his hand. "May I have this dance, Miss Penrose?" She turned, a smile touching her lips, a real smile, one that reached her eyes. "I believe, Your Grace," she said, her voice soft. "You may." He drew her into his arms. There was no music. He just held her. And they moved, a slow, silent waltz in the moonlight. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. She rested her head against his chest. She heard his heart, a steady, strong beat beneath her ear. She was not a gossip. She was not a schemer. She was not a scandal. She was just Lydia. And she was, at last, at peace.